Legends aren't born. They step silently out of the dark when hope is lost. That's what they whispered in the shadows of Forward Operating Base Arrowhead, deep in the unforgiving ridges where every sunrise felt borrowed. Fear clung to us like an extra layer under body armor. Out here, patrols vanished into the mountains and never returned, ambushes camouflaged by dust and dread. No one slept easy. No one dared to brag. Inside the operations tent, sweaty with nerves and stale air, boots rang out a sharp rhythm on plywood, commanding attention. In walked Master Sergeant Maya Ramirez. She moved soft and narrow-shouldered, her uniform clinging to a small frame that didn't fit the stories we'd heard. She looked like she should be invisible, but not the kind of invisible people told legends about. Yet, as she stepped inside, I noticed how the laughter faded to a hush, how the map-huddled lieutenants straightened their backs, and how the Navy SEALs lounging at the edge of the table exchanged glances. One of them nodded toward her, a half-smirk curling up as if he didn't believe the rumors either. "That's really her? The Phantom they keep talking about?" one muttered, just loud enough for us to catch the scorn. At the front, Brigadier General Malcolm Ashford stood waiting, a man as bristling and old-school as they came, with medals pressed across his chest and a stare that had broken careers before the enemy ever could. He didn't buy into whispers. He only cared about results, and the ghost standing before him looked like anything but a result. The tension thickened until it felt like the dust itself might explode. Muted amusement flickered at the corners of lips. A SEAL rocked back in his chair, shaking his head. I felt the room's expectations swell, the way a gunpowder barrel swells before it blows. General Ashford focused his gaze, his eyes sharpening behind wire-rimmed glasses. You could almost hear him thinking. He didn't trust rumors. He hated campfire stories even more. And what he really despised were so-called legends that his command could never touch or shape. He pushed away from the ops table, boots thumping a command into the warped floor. "You!" he barked, voice cutting through our nerves. "Step forward!" Ramirez didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just stepped ahead, as if she'd already played this scene in her mind 100 times. Suddenly, all eyes locked on her, hungry for whatever was about to happen. "Name, unit," General Ashford demanded, his phrasing as sharp as barbed wire. Her reply was even, smooth, practiced. "Master Sergeant Maya Ramirez, 2nd Recon, sir." He watched her through narrowed eyes, unsatisfied. There was a rumor that had dripped back to us from the edge of disaster, a name that trickled from raid to patrol, a shadow that bled through reports and midnight conversations. He wanted to hear it spoken in his presence. Not just another Marine. He needed the myth to stand before him, breakable and real. He leaned in, voice dropping low, but every syllable slicing clear. "Call sign." The effect was electric. The tent held its breath. Maps lay forgotten, pens stilled over paper. No one moved. Ramirez raised her chin, matching the general's stare. She replied with words as quiet as a trigger pull, but every syllable sharp. "Ghost, Echo 1. The name scattered laughter and erased every doubt, sinking like a cold stone into the center of the room. For a moment, not even General Ashford spoke. He'd read the sealed briefs, the incident logs marked "Need to Know," the ones filled with impossible stories. But now the myth had a face, and that face didn't waver. Men who had scoffed minutes earlier now seemed to shrink in their uniforms. Grins disappeared. Even the SEALs sat rigid in their chairs, eyes fixed on her as if seeing for the first time. And just like that, the name Ghost Echo 1 shifted from legend to fact, the kind that chills the bones of even the hardest soldier. But in that stillness, the real test was only beginning. The silence inside the tent was suffocating, a living, crawling thing that crept up your spine. Ghost Echo 1. The name seemed to echo off every canvas wall, vibrating in marrow and memory. Even those who'd never believed in ghost stories now found their assumptions crumbling, piece by piece. I scanned the faces around me. Not a single man met Ramirez's eyes, not even the ones who'd been quietly deriding her moments before. General Ashford's hand pressed white against the table as he studied her. This was a man carved from campaigns and scars, a veteran of more wars than he'd admit. He'd seen heroes rise and fall, seen how rumors could lift a soldier to mythical heights, or drag them into the dirt. Ghosts, he'd always said, belonged in stories, not in his command. Yet here he was, standing only feet from a legend, breathing, unblinking, unyielding. He leaned in, the edge in his voice sharper, almost personal. Not good enough. Tell me, how did you get that name? Ramirez just held her ground, unruffled. Some might call it indifference. I saw it for what it really was. A calm, drawn from fire. The composure of someone who'd crawled through hell and refused to bring it home. She didn't grandstand. She just said, by bringing my team back. Every time, sir, all eyes, even those that dared at first to sneer, shifted now with something like respect. I watched as the tall SEAL in the back, the one who'd bristled with silent challenge, nodded almost imperceptibly. No one uttered a sound, and so we waited in a limbo heavier than fear, hanging on what came next. General Ashford was a man obsessed with discipline and truth. He hated what he couldn't see, predict, or control. I knew he would push her further, but even he seemed to sense he was facing something immovable. After a heartbeat that felt like a year, he finally broke the tension, his voice more thoughtful than before. I hope you're more than just a story, Ramirez. I don't need ghosts. I need Marines who bring their men home. Ramirez did not flinch. Sir, that's exactly what I do. That answer settled over us like a weight. It was no boast. The certainty in her voice was the kind of thing soldiers recognize instantly. It was the sound of survival. It wasn't always like this. Weeks earlier, before her name passed from tent to tent, the streets of the city had already memorized her legend. Back then, it had been just another routine patrol. The kind where every corner felt too quiet, where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ramirez was point that night, the first boot in the dust, rifle always moving. The city pressed close, walls jagged with bullet scars, children's eyes peeking from broken doorways. She moved with slow, deliberate focus, never trusting the silence that pressed in from every side. Then, without warning, the world erupted. Gunfire crashed down from shattered rooftops, tearing the narrow street apart. Shouts and screams burst over the comms in a tangled storm. Marines dove for cover, hiding behind blistered walls and the skeletons of burnt-out trucks. The first bullet snapped air so close to Ramirez's cheek that it carried the taste of stone. Trapped, pinned. Marines bleeding out with nowhere to run, no angles left uncovered. The city itself seemed to conspire, trapping them in an alley shaped like a grave. But Ramirez didn't freeze. She shrank into the rubble and waited, breathing, thinking, while panic tore through her squad. She watched the pattern of muzzle flashes, the angles of fire, reading them as if the chaos had left instructions just for her. There she spotted it. A tiny overlap where enemy lines didn't quite meet. A way through if she had the guts. She didn't hesitate. Sliding out from cover, she crawled through dust and shattered glass, ignoring the crackling rounds that snapped just above her back. Inch by inch, she moved deeper into the maze, slipping through the city's veins until she vanished into a gap behind enemy eyes. Nobody saw her move. She became the ghost the stories hinted at. From the far side, the tide began to turn. Methodical, silent, Ramirez eliminated the first rooftop gunner with a single, controlled shot. Then another. With every squeeze of the trigger, another hostile threat fell, confusion spreading on the enemy's side like wildfire. The relentless hail of bullets that had pigeonholed the Marines faltered, then staggered, then fell apart under the precision of someone who made impossibility look routine. Suddenly, my radio crackled with hope. "Push up! Go! Now!" The order cut through our shock, and for the first time since the world exploded, our squad surged forward, reclaiming the street. When Ramirez dropped back beside us, her uniform streaked with dust and sweat, her rifle still warm, she uttered not a single word. She didn't have to. Every Marine there understood the reality. We were all still breathing because of her. Not one of us was left behind. Not a single Marine failed to come home that night. When the official reports came trickling back later, higher-ups debated what had happened. Some called it luck. Others insisted the tales had been inflated by adrenaline and fear. But among those who'd bled in those alleys, no explanation felt right, except the one that had been whispered with awe and reverence in the mess lines, in the back of supply trucks, and across crackling radios. Ghost Echo 1 had brought them all home. It wasn't long before her call sign became a quiet chant in the chow hall, something painted on battered helmet liners, scrawled onto the backs of faded photographs, or murmured in foxhole prayers. That name, Ghost Echo 1, held a kind of magic. It was the promise that, no matter how bad things got, there was someone out there who'd find a way. Someone who'd refuse to leave a single man behind. Back in the operations tent, the legend was thick in the air. You could feel it in the way Marines kept their distance, no longer out of derision but out of a growing reverence. Even the SEALs, those hard men who'd tested her with laughter and sideways glances, kept their remarks to themselves. Silence had transformed from awkwardness to respect, the kind you only see when people realize they're in the presence of something rare. General Ashford folded his arms, staring at Ramirez. He had seen men crumble beneath unearned reputations, false heroes whose stories got louder than their courage ever could. To him, legends were traps that beckoned young soldiers into reckless faith, the kind of myths that got men killed. He knew all too well how hope could curdle into carelessness the moment someone believed a teammate was invincible. He rose slowly, the lines in his face more pronounced than before, and closed the gap between himself and Ramirez. For a heartbeat, it was only the two of them. The weight of stories, survival, and the unspoken fears of every man present pressed down on the tent. He fixed her with a stare so intense even the most unshakable would have shifted beneath it. "Do you have any idea what you've just done, Sergeant?" His voice was lightning, quiet, but sure to leave scars. Ramirez drew her shoulders back. "Yes, sir." His jaw clenched as he pressed further. "Men will believe you're not breakable. They'll believe you can't fall. And if you ever do—" He didn't have to finish the sentence. The possibility hung in the air, dark and sharp as a blade. Around them, Marines exchanged nervous glances. Some shifted their boots, eager to disappear into the tent walls. No one dared speak up. But Ramirez held his gaze and did not waver. Her answer was simple but rang with cutting honesty. "Then I won't fall, sir." The entire tent seemed to shrink around that promise. Even the steady hum of the distant generator fell away. In the hush that followed, General Ashford didn't move, searching her face like a tactician scans a map, each contour for weakness, every line for any hint of bluff or bravado. But he found only conviction, cool, burnished, and absolute. A younger lieutenant, face still bearing the softness of home, darted a glance at the general, no doubt expecting a rebuke. Instead, Ashford let out the slowest exhale, shoulders settling just enough to speak again. This time the ice in his tone was thinner, hinting at something else beneath. A reluctant admiration maybe, respect carved from hard-earned proof. "You think it's that simple?" he asked, voice pitched low enough for only those closest to catch. Ramirez never broke eye contact. "I don't think, sir." "I know. My Marines breathe because I refuse to break." That landed like thunder, silencing even the doubt still twitching in the corners of the room. One of the SEALs, the very same who had mocked minutes before, glanced at his boots, his expression somewhere between embarrassment and awe. Across the table, an army captain pressed his lips tight, acutely aware that whatever legend had preceded Ramirez was now sharpened and cemented into reality. General Ashford's posture changed, barely, but enough to be noticed. The skepticism never left his eyes, but something else glimmered through it now. He stepped back just a fraction, voice no longer booming, but steady and meaningful. "All right, Ghost Echo 1, let's see if the stories stand up to daylight." No one in the tent moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Everyone, regardless of rank or reputation, recognized the moment for what it was. The birth of a new order, the shuddering away of old doubts. Suddenly, the tent flap flung open, sending a shock of cold outside air swirling through the tension. A young corporal jogged in, face pale beneath the overhead lights, a thick folder gripped in trembling hands. He stopped at the table, eyes locked on Ashford. "We've lost comms with Alpha Recon. Last check-in was 20 minutes ago. Outer District." "Sir, they may be surrounded." A cold pulse of unease thudded into the tent. Every trained instinct told us what that meant. Lost comms on the city's edge usually spelled a death sentence, a unit swallowed whole by the darkness beyond our walls. The air in the tent, already fragile, vibrated with a new anxiety as the young corporal's words settled in. I could feel every heartbeat in the room synchronizing, bracing for orders that would send some of us back into the grinder. General Ashford kept his composure, showing no hint of the concern that flickered through the room. His attention landed on Ramirez with a certainty that needed no explanation. "Sergeant Ramirez," he said quietly, the timbre of his voice slicing through the uncertainty. "You're on point. Lead the rescue." There was no hesitation. "Yes, sir," Ramirez answered, adjusting her helmet with a calm so unshakable it had become signature. Around her, Marines and SEALs rose to their feet, the usual chatter replaced by the metallic click of gear being checked, magazines seated, helmets fastened tighter. Some of those men still nursed skepticism, but next to it now burned a sharp, vulnerable faith. The convoy set out under a sickle moon, engines idling low to avoid greeting the enemy with noise. I sat across from Ramirez in the back of the lead APC, watching her as she checked her rifle, gloved hands moving in a ritual that seemed more meditative than mechanical. Her eyes, for a brief second, closed as she mapped out every inch of the district in her mind. The avenues, the alleys where ambushes liked to bloom, the blind spots she'd crawled through before. The outskirts of Iron Vale were a shadow world. Streets narrowed into alleys after dusk, punctuated by burned-out cars and windowless shells of buildings. Sometimes children watched us from doorways. Sometimes even the dogs kept away. As we rolled past the last checkpoint, Ashford's voice rasped over the comms. "Ghost Echo 1, lead them in as briefed." We dismounted in silence, boots crunching over broken gravel. The night around us felt too still, the kind of stillness that always means something awful is waiting to erupt. Ramirez signaled us forward with a small motion. There was a trust in the way we moved, not unthinking, but willing to yield our survival to her judgment. A gutted van provided our first cover. She crouched low, motioning us to hold. Her gaze swept the surrounding rooftops, windows black as gun barrels. Somewhere behind those shadows, Alpha Recon was trapped or already gone. The tension thickened my breath, pressing it into something hard to swallow. "Feels too quiet," a SEAL whispered. "Feels wrong." Ramirez answered only with a hand signal, her palm slicing through the air in a gesture for silence. My respect for her had started as curiosity, grown into awe, and now was something deeper, a belief that, if there was a way out of this ambush, she would find it before it swallowed us, too. Then it happened. A sudden crack echoed in the night, a sniper's shot that set off a chain reaction, bullets splitting the silence and sparking every window, every hidden alcove, into deadly life. One of ours dropped hard, pulled quickly to safety behind the engine block by two teammates. The comms exploded with frantic voices as chaos filled the alley. Enemies had pressed every advantage, turning rooftops and choke points into firing lines that boxed us in. Muzzle flashes danced from impossible angles. Somewhere, a machine gun barked an order, herding us into a blind spot. Ramirez pressed herself flat to a crumbling wall, eyes darting as she built the map of battle in her head. She spotted a line of broken bricks, just enough for a fast climb. She barely spoke above the roar, "Cover my ascent!" Without argument, rifles snapped to new angles. Ramirez moved, a streak of shadow and purpose, scaling those bricks as if the city itself had granted her permission to pass. Bullets spat at her feet, snapped at her back, but she climbed without pause, rolling over the edge of the rooftop as fire traced her heels. Above, she became the ghost the city feared, silent, deliberate, reading the battlefield from a vantage only the reckless or the supernatural would dare take. Her first shot dropped a sniper before he could cycle the bolt. Her second snaked through the headspace of an enemy automatic rifleman, silencing him mid-burst. All the while, she never stopped moving, never paused for more than the half moment it took to spot her next target. Below, the shift was immediate. Enemy fire faltered, grew uncertain. A Marine next to me looked up, catching a glimpse of her silhouette, moving low, measured, never frantic. "She's clearing them," he whispered, the disbelief nearly disguised by admiration. The rest of us surged on her cue, dragging the wounded, pressing forward as escape routes opened one by one. Ramirez, from above, rained down cover fire, each shot creating another chance for us to slip through the kill zone, each round buying our freedom by inches. It was never enough to just survive. Ramirez made sure that every Marine got out. She never wasted a bullet, never demanded thanks. By the time silence settled back over the rooftops, Alpha Recon was with us again. Shaken, battered, not one man lost to the alleys. When we regrouped on the far side, breathing blessed dust and the smell of spent gunpowder, Ramirez was the last down the ladder. She rejoined us with the same quiet dignity as if all she'd done was check the perimeter. The SEALs who'd once doubted her offered only silent nods. Nothing cocky survived confrontation with reality. Someone, nobody will say who, murmured, "She's no legend. She's the reason we're still here." That truth burned brighter than any campfire story, no longer a suggestion, but a concrete fact we had all seen, all felt, and could never again deny. We rolled back to Arrowhead, the armored vehicles creeping through the ruined avenues, headlights low and eyes wide. The city's tension trailed us like a living shadow, but as we crossed the wire, every man accounted for, battered but unbroken, a subtle victory hummed beneath the grime and sweat. I caught a glimpse of platoon medics rushing in, tending fast and careful to shrapnel wounds and raw fear. But what hung loudest in that return wasn't the ring of gunfire or the sting of scraped skin. It was the weight of new respect, earned and undeniable. Inside the tent, midnight silence was altogether different. The same SEALs who had stoked the fire of doubt earlier now stood along the canvas wall, their gazes unreadable. Marines who once muttered behind cupped hands moved with the stiffness of men who had glimpsed something beyond rules and rank. Nobody dared crack a joke or even whisper. General Ashford awaited us at the head of the briefing table, arms crossed, ribbons glinting faintly under the harsh light. When Ramirez entered with the rest of the surviving patrol, every muddy boot and rattling dog tag fell quiet. A silence this time, not born of suspicion, but something more sacred, reverence forged in blood and adrenaline. He fixed Ramirez with his hard, unblinking stare, but the skepticism had faded. All of us stood witness as the general, a man who measured courage in bruises and body counts, addressed her with a gravity none could mistake. "Ghost Echo 1, he pronounced, letting the call sign roll out and settle over us like a benediction. "You brought every man home. You wrote the after-action report with your own hands." No speech, no grandstanding. Just the faintest nod, the kind reserved for respect harder than steel. Nobody wanted to be the first to shatter the moment. Even the SEALs, men who wore bravado like armor, stood silent, eyes lowered ever so slightly. The Marines who had once scoffed looked instead as if they might be in prayer. For that heartbeat, time itself seemed to step softly, honoring the gravity of what we'd just survived. Ramirez did not falter, did not show triumph or defiance. She simply snapped off a tight, perfect salute, the movement sharp as a blade. General Ashford returned it, crisp and short, the exchange forming a private pact between warrior and commander. There was nothing left to prove. No more room for rumor or legend, only the confirmation of presence. She was real, and she was enough. That night, the story of Ghost Echo 1 moved faster than any radio signal. From armored sentry posts to the low-lit chow hall, from sandbagged lookout towers to humming barrack bunks, her name became the new currency of certainty. Privates scrawled GE1 into their helmet liners, carved it on rifle straps and ammo pouches. New recruits whispered her exploits as gospel, carefully passing them down the line, while grizzled sergeants nodded in silent, knowing agreement. None of us needed to exaggerate. The truth was fierce enough. I wandered away from the hum of returning squads and the dim glow of generators that night, drawn to a patch of sandbags beneath the star-bleached sky. There I found Ramirez, legs dangling over the edge, rifle across her lap. Her movements were slow, thoughtful as she ran a rag over her weapon. It seemed less a cleaning and more a rite, a gesture toward the life each shot had protected. She didn't turn as I approached, but I was close enough to catch the words meant for neither me nor any other living soul. Quiet, spoken to the night alone. If they make it back, that's all the legend I need. The wind slipped her words into the darkness, carrying them down the silent rows of tents, into hidden corners and restless dreams. Somewhere in the distant barracks, laughter bubbled up, raw, relieved, alive. It sounded sharper than usual, colored by something harder to name. We were not safe, and the city would soon swallow more nights. But because of her, because of Ghost Echo 1, we had won this one. Our own, our legend, our proof that even the wildest ghost story could sometimes walk among us, wearing our uniform and carrying the burden for everyone else. Ghost Echo 1 was no longer a whisper or a rumor drifting on the wind. She was a legacy, stitched into the bones of those who survived to tell tomorrow's story.